Hello again, guys. Well, how could I forget the name of this guy, the creator of the speech acts, the John Longshall Austin? In the other video, I was talking about him. This was the canonical work this guy has written, and afterwards, the Van der Wacken and uh, John Searle, they have changed a lot of rules, mainly about its taxonomy and how to organize all the criteria behind the realization satisfaction of a speech act. We don't need to enter in this difference right now, but this was the first uh, literal and explicit work about speech acts. This guy talks about how to do things with words. Like, for example, it's impossible to marry two people without speaking. So, like, for example, I would have to be a priest, and we would have to be in a formal situation in which I'm marrying two people in a church, for example, and I have the authority to do so. But like I've told you guys before, like in my master degree, you can see my curriculum here. I did this master thesis about the koan problem. It was in Portuguese, but in this work, I was talking about the problem of epistemology inside the philosophy of language, because we would have to investigate whether you actually have the right to marry two people, for example. But what is the reality itself, by the way? We don't know what will be the criteria to establish whether something is real or not. Now, this is, I could say that this is a kind of ontology, metaphysics, but this is something that we should ask. How do I know that this is true or false? But of course, that uh, like inauguration, for example, that would be true or not only if I knew whether this guy is a mayor or not. Of course, the philosophy of language would say, but I don't care about this. I'm supposing that you are the official mayor and you would have to be the official mayor to inaugurate something. But the problem behind ontology and epistemology, this thing, this matter, is that is there a solution for this? Is it even possible to establish eventually that someone is the official mayor? Is there a possibility to know indistinguishably whether you are the mayor or not? And there is not, actually. The knowledge is something very problematic, and we don't have uh, like fundamental or a definitive criteria to define whether something is real or not. Of course, I'm being kind of extreme here, but it's like I've told you guys before. We are not doing a science of philosophy here, but philosophy itself. It's not my fault that I can doubt everything. So if I cannot establish whether something is real or not, how could eventually I suppose that there is an official mayor to inaugurate something? This is a problem. So let's continue the reading here. Metaphysical aspects of the English grammar. In order to understand this element of philosophy applied to grammar, let's remember that metaphysics, firstly thought by Aristotle's readers, in everything which weren't about physics and other natural sciences, is a branch of philosophy that theorizes about what are the fundamental constituents. No? I would have to remove this s here. No? The adjectives don't have plural. The fundamental constituents of a given object of analysis. Very famous metaphysics statements are every effect has a cause, for example, or or René Descartes. If I think, therefore I am. We have a lot of metaphysical questions like what is the beginning of existence? Is the human being utterly bad? Can we have consciousness after death? What is life and death anyway? Considering this, we are going to see that some arbitrary decisions about how the reality is made have been decisive to establish some morphological and syntactical rules in English grammar. So, the English grammar rules have suffered effects from the constitution of the world itself. So, if the world were different from what it is right now, the grammar rules would be another too. This is very interesting. First one, the verb there is the same as it exists. There is actually implies that for an English speaker, everything that exists can be pointed at. This is very interesting. That is a metaphysical statement. Why? Because there is an adverb of location and is the to be verb. We could say there is a pig, meaning a pig exists, or simply pointing out its location, probably using some kind of ostensive behavior. So there is a pig. I can see the pig there. This means that an English speaker is supposedly very materialistic. So we could say something about the morals, the ethics behind an English speaker, a native speaker. These guys, they grow up believing that the world is much more material than people from Asia, for example, and only attributes existence to things that he or she could locate, either in the physical or mental reality. Could someone point to a Pegasus inside one's head? So yes, of course, this is applied to all the variations of this compound verb. There was, there has been, there will be. This is the simple past, present perfect, the simple future, even including an adverb. There has never been, etc. So, yes, I can point out to a Pegasus inside my head. Everything can be pointed out. This is a contingent rule about this world that we live in. Maybe there might be another world in which we can talk about things without pointing out. It's kind of paradoxical to think about this because I would have to point to a world in which where we cannot point to things. This is something very hard to imagine. Two, let's take a look at these verbs. To be, to do, and to have. Three verbs. It is assumed that there are three fundamental actions that give rise to all the others, and therefore are used as auxiliary verbs. So these are the auxiliary verbs in English. So these are the auxiliary verbs because we can only basically do three things in this world: to be, to do, and to have, which will be a kind of to do, like we will see right now. If we think about it, this is surprisingly true. If I talk about a property or state of myself, I have to use to be verb to express this. Example, I am a teacher. I was a teacher. I was sick 2 days ago. I use the to be verb to talk about properties of mine. If I talk about an action, I have to use the to do verb. Like, I don't know, she does run a lot when I want to be emphatic. I use the auxiliary verb, even in affirmations, right? And finally, when I want to express a particular verb aspect of the English language, which is called the perfect aspect. And we know that we have four aspects in the English grammar: simple, continuous, perfect, perfect continuous. I need to use the verb to have in order to do so. I have been happy with your presence. This is a present perfect, right? This is something that I want to talk about, something from the past, but I don't necessarily want to specify the instant that something happened. You have to remember also, concerning the philosophy of grammar, that these instants are arbitrary too. like yesterday, 2 hours ago, 10 years ago, one decade, one century ago. It doesn't matter. If you want to consider the minimum units of time, these are your instants. If not, you are dealing with an interval of time. Like, I've been happy my entire life. This is a period, not an instant. My entire life. Which is a kind of property that could only be expressed with this auxiliary verb. So we need this auxiliary verb to express the perfect aspect. Of course, the English language has arbitrated to this thing. It could have been some other words to represent this, and it is a metaphysical statement that we cannot act linguistically more than two ways. To have is a kind of to do, because we cannot think in more actions besides being something or doing something. So take a look. We are doing this very interesting thing of restricting the things that we can do in general in this reality. We can only do and be things. So that's why the English grammar has decided to have basically two auxiliary verbs. And ultimately, to be is a kind of to do. So I'm doing the act of being. So I could say that we have only one auxiliary verb. Three, talking about verb aspects, let's consider the mysterious present perfect, which is very problematic for Portuguese, for Brazilian students. Characterized by the general form subject pronoun to have participle of a verb. Many grammars, erroneously, they claim that the function of the present perfect is to talk about a past event that has consequences for the present. But this is clearly wrong, since, for example, he has died could not be talking about a present state or a dead person. The dead don't act. No? The dead, the dead in general, don't act anymore. And could perfectly mean he died, as we use in simple past. And both tenses represent that someone that was alive has now no life whatsoever. So, of course, the simple past, he died, also brings consequences for the present. So this is not a good explanation for the present perfect. Also, it is easy to see that I can admit that his death, in the simple past phrase, brings various effects to the present, which, according to the grammars, should only be a function of the present perfect. Such as the fact that I still miss him. I miss the guy who has died or who died. If I use this in the simple past, I can talk about a lot of things of the present that are related to the simple past event. I'm paying his debts, for example. Therefore, none of these characterizes and motivates the present perfect. Let's see its real reason for being. We should know that the evolution of language takes place under the following practical premise. We should be as informative as possible in the shortest possible time interval. This is a linguistic statement, not a metaphysical one, by the way. So, this interest of being the most informative possible in the least interval of time, this is an interest of the science of language. We don't have to do this. There's no special reason or special purpose or special motivation to do so. We just want to save time. This is about survival, right? We have to act fastly to obtain the things that we need in order to survive in this world. According to Paul Grice in his Logic and Conversation, in a rational conversation, we respect four maxims: quality, when you are talking about a true information; quantity, no more and no less than necessary information; mode, you have to be clear; and relation, you have to talk something relevant in the conversation. If we observe disrespect of one of them, we assume that whoever did it had a good reason for it, which usually only happens when the speaker means something beyond what was literally said. So when you violate one of these four maxims, either you are not rational, or if you are rational, you have done this for a reason. And when I realize that you have violated this rule for a reason, I must like immediately investigate which reason would it be. So how does this help about the present perfect? Suppose you want to say something about the past. There are things you can't say when it happened. And he has grown up, we cannot actually have the grasp of when he did it. So we just see in the present that he doesn't have the same stature anymore. So it's impossible to say when someone has grown up. You cannot say this verb in simple past necessarily, because you cannot count when someone has grown up. Like let's say in simple past, I grew up yesterday, I grew up 2 years ago, I grew up 2 p.m. January 12th of 2022. So that would be humanly impossible to establish all the infinitesimal instance in which I grew up. So I cannot say this in simple past. And if I could, this wouldn't be interesting because I would have to list all the infinitesimal instance and in which I grew up. So this kind of verb you have to speak necessarily in present perfect. This is very interesting. We cannot actually have the grasp of when he did it. So we just see in the present that the guy is taller than before. You don't want to say, this is something interesting. One of the reasons that we have created the present perfect, when you don't want to say the instant of when something happened, or are irrelevant to say concerning the time of the event. Like, for example, when you make questions without the WH question when. Like, where has this happened? Who has done this? Why you have done this? So when you don't ask when, you are not interested in the instant. Therefore, you cannot speak in the simple past. And this, conversely, you can deduce that when you use when to make questions, you have to use the simple past. So this is something interesting. When you speak something in the simple past, someone immediately would ask you, when? I did it yesterday. When? Like, well, which hour, for example. That would be a subset of when, right? Which hour? So, when you don't want to say or are irrelevant to say concerning the time of the event, therefore, if you want to talk about something from the past without informing when, but only whether this happened or not, the violation of the maxims of quantity and manner, like for example, why am I hiding the day, the time? You, as a rational being, would ask me, why is this guy hiding these relevant informations about the past? Because all the past is about something from the past. And there is an instant, a time for each one of these things. But are they relevant? Are they relevant? Which would be a counterfactual behavior while the past, and therefore time, is concerned. If we're talking about time, it's important to say when this happened, right? So the violation of the maxims of quantity and manner implies that for the conversation, the fact that happens now is more important than the past event and what occurred during it. So when I speak something in the present perfect, I'm much more concerned in the present event that has been influenced by something from the past. So I don't know when this thing in the past happened, and I don't care. But I know that was a sufficient reason to justify the present events. And this is the real explanation for the present perfect. For example, I have grown says that I grew up in infinitesimal intervals. It is not measured, and is not relevant to measure anyway. And that, for example, I am now a responsible man. So I am a responsible man because I have grown up. So all the present perfect, by the way, it involves these. I would call this a compound clause, a compound period. When you deal with two clauses, two phrases with verbs and subjects. So I am a responsible man right now because I have grown. Of course, in a doctor consultation, for example, if the height of the person is the subject of one's growing up problem, for example, I why isn't this guy growing up normally? Well, let's make some measures and see like your height in 2010, in 2012, in 2014. In this case, measuring the height of this person in arbitrary instance of the past would be relevant. So I would have to use the simple past in these cases. The conversation, the conversation could happen in the simple past if these things were relevant, right? In other words, logically and epistemologically speaking, also already bringing up the next stop, the present perfect tense is used only to reveal a sufficient condition for the present event. So we are talking about logic right now. There is logic behind grammar, like pure logic, where we investigate the necessary and sufficient reasons for things. So we have this metaphysical statement that grounds a reason for the creation of the present perfect tense. Take a look. This is a metaphysical statement about this contingent world that we live in. Everything that happens has a sufficient reason to be like this and not otherwise. This is very important. I'm telling you something basic from your own reality, from mine too. And this thing interferes in the grammar rules. Of course, we know that the sufficient condition, this cause, has to be finished, a finished one. And that's why we have the name perfect, which alludes to something that doesn't need anything to be added upon. It is perfect. Perfect is something that you don't need to add anything more, right? That's why it's perfect. So it's finished. It's not finished in the normal, ordinary way. Like I finished my job, but is it perfect? To be perfect, but in some values within it, this is something more that we have invented in our social dynamics, right? But the time of the event, as long as the knowledge of the cause is concerned, simply doesn't matter. The time of event doesn't matter. I just want this to be the sufficient reason for the present events. Thus, the present perfect tense has been created to eliminate noise in the conversation, to exclude unnecessary information, and meet the practical premise that we spoke about at the beginning of this third survey, the efficiency of language. So, do you remember that rule of linguistics? To say the most uh, the biggest number of things in the least time possible. So the present perfect helps you to eliminate this noise, this unnecessary information, in order to make you respect the this maxim behind the linguistics, right? And for now, let's just not talk about the fact that the present tense is just a description of a habit not a description of an actual action. When you are talking about simple present, like I like pizza, I'm not describing you a real event. This event is not documented. I'm telling you a description of a habit of mine. Even in the case of the performatives. Performatives are those verbs that when you say something, you are doing it so. Like, for example, uh, I inaugurate this thing, I baptize you. Uh, this is something in the simple present, but yes, when you when you use it in the performative case, you're not trying to actually create something recorded in the line of time. You are just acting. It's different from something that you speak about the past. When you talk about the past, we are talking about the register of the events of the world. But when I say to you, I baptize children every day. This is not an event. I'm just telling you a habit of mine. I could say that maybe the performatives are indeed an actual a performed action, but you are not doing this to register in time. But you are saying this to actually act in the world. No? It's not something like we do in simple past. Because every present statement is already in the past in an infinitesimal scale. And of course, physically speaking, I can say that even in the performative cases, although it seems like an action, it is already in the past because I could say that the present is just a recent past, right? You might remember this statement from events of your life. Well, let's finish this class right now and we will continue the next video. Hope to see you guys there. Bye bye.